I'd like to review a crash that occurred in September of 2018. In fact, the third anniversary of that's quickly approaching. And this accident, like every other accident in aviation, was multifactorial. In other words, more than one issue was the cause of the accident. There was no one thing that you could point at to say, oh, this was definitely the cause of the accident. But there were several factors involved in this one of which was pilot control lighting. Pilot control lighting came out, started seeing it showing up a lot in the early 80s, and as an effort to save electricity and money for smaller airports that had very few operations at night. The problem with pilot control lighting when it first came out, I remember I had made the statement that, one day this is going to end up with somebody getting hurt or killed because they're going to get someplace and be, for whatever reason, be unable to turn on the lights. There can be multiple reasons where you can get the lights turned on. But unfortunately, that actually happened in September of 2018 at Festus, Missouri. Again, like every accident in aviation, this one had several factors that contributed. In fact, we could look at each of those factors, and I probably will do an additional video on each of the contributing factors on this one because there's several things that came into play here. But initially, he had electrical failure, and when he had the electrical failure, he did have one fuel stop. He ended up refueling the airplane and then continued on into dark conditions without any lighting. And I know they said that he had picked up a headwind, arrived later than expected, but fuel starvation was an issue. After he arrived there, they couldn't get the lights on, and he ultimately crashed. But again, several factors to look at, but we're going to specifically look in this video at pilot control lighting. So I mentioned there may be several reasons that you can't turn on the pilot control lighting when you arrive at the airport. In this case, he had an electrical failure, so obviously his radio, along with all the other electrical equipment, didn't work. But it's possible to have just a radio failure as well, not to have a total electrical failure, but to have a radio failure. And if you fly and you only have one radio in the aircraft, there's a good argument for having a second radio in the aircraft. If you did have a primary radio failure, then it can be an issue. The best way to address that is to have a handheld radio on board the aircraft. In the case of this accident, he did have a handheld radio on board. However, the batteries had run down to a point where he was unable to transmit sufficiently to turn on the lights. So again, a handheld backup radio is a great thing to have. You might want to be sure that your batteries are in good shape or have an extra set of batteries available to you. Another common reason for not being able to initially turn on the lights is that you may be on the wrong frequency. You may have written the frequency down incorrectly. And this sort of thing can happen a lot more frequently if you're going to an area or to an airport that you're unfamiliar with. You can rapidly cycle through the frequencies, and you could transmit quite quickly. You just start at 122.7, you do 122.7, 122.8, 122.9, 122.95, 123.0, and 123.05, and that's going to get 95% of the airports that you're going to be flying into, GA airports, with pilot control lighting. So you could quickly cycle through all of those frequencies to make sure that you're not on the incorrect frequency. And since we're on the subject of night flying, another good thing to have on board the aircraft with you is at least one, if not multiple, flashlights. And we have these small LED flashlights that we keep one on the key to the aircraft. I have one on my key ring. In fact, let me see here. Here's the one on my key ring, and it works. All right. So having multiple flashlights on board the aircraft can be a big advantage as well. And don't forget that your cell phone is also a flashlight. Has a flashlight function on it, can be quite useful and can last quite a long time, which again is a great reason to keep your cell phone essentially fully charged before you go on any night flight. Right? It's probably the best piece of survival equipment you can have on board the aircraft. You can call for help, functions as a flashlight. You can determine where you're at. It has GPS and map function. So your cell phone is a very valuable piece of equipment for survival if you end up having to put the aircraft down somewhere. And the other thing that you probably should do when flying at night is to treat those flights at night, especially into areas that you're not familiar with. You should probably treat them more like an instrument flight into conditions and have enough fuel to get to an alternate airport, plus 20. Don't run yourself short on fuel, because if you get to your intended airport and for whatever reason, ground fog, or can't get the pilot control lighting on or whatever, then if you have enough fuel to get to an alternate airport, you're leaving yourself a big out there. So. Okay, so what lessons did we learn reviewing this accident? Number one, pilot control lighting. You've got to have a backup radio, and again, just a handheld radio with adequate batteries or an extra set of batteries is a huge advantage if you have problems with radio communications and your ability to turn on the lights, right? Again, having plenty of fuel and treating a night cross country more like an instrument flight, having a good reserve to get to an alternate airport is another big advantage, as well as having multiple flashlights on board the aircraft. Your cell phone being one of those, and again being a great piece of survival equipment. So, okay, so that wraps it up for this one. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys on the next video.